GHD SitUp Biomechanical Analysis by Caitlin, Taylor, and Sam. Here is the GHD SitUp. In part 1, we'll be analyzing the joints, movements, and muscles involved. The ankle, knee, hip, lumbar spine, and glenohumeral joints are involved in the start position. The ankle joint begins plantar flexed and undergoes slight dorsiflexion via eccentric motion of the anterior tibialis. The knee joint begins flexed and undergoes extension via eccentric action of the gastrocnemius, semimembranosus, semitendinosus, and biceps femoris. The hip joint begins flexed and undergoes extension through eccentric action of the rectus femoris, iliopsoas, and some concentric actions of the gluteals. The lumbar spine begins flexed and undergoes some extension but mostly no motion due to some eccentric but mostly isometric action by the rectus abdominis, transverse abdominis, and internal and external obliques. The glenohumeral joint begins flexed and internally rotated and undergoes flexion and external rotation through concentric action of the deltoid and supraspinatus and eccentric action of the latissimus dorsi, teres major, serratus anterior, and pectoralis major and minor. Here you'll see the middle position and the second phase of motion, which involves the same joints as the first. In this phase, the ankle is plantar flexed and undergoes plantar flexion through concentric action of the anterior tibialis. The knee joint is slightly flexed and undergoes extension, then flexion, first using the quadriceps, then the hamstrings and gastrocnemius in a concentric motion. The hips are extended and undergo flexion through concentric action of the rectus femoris and iliopsoas. The lumbar spine is extended and undergoes either no movement, then slight flexion, using mostly isometric but some concentric action of the rectus abdominis, transverse abdominis, internal and external obliques. The glenohumeral joint is flexed and externally rotated and undergoes extension and internal rotation through concentric motion of the latissimus dorsi, teres major, pectoralis major, and minor. Here is the GHD SitUp performed in slow motion. Part 2, Position, Velocity, and Acceleration. Angular position changes through the GHD SitUp. Body parts rostral to the hips have greater angular displacement than those closer, and the angular velocity of the hips is slower than that at the shoulders or head. The greatest acceleration occurs at the beginning, middle, and end of the move as the body speeds up or slows down to change direction. Newton's third law, which states that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction, is the most relevant to the GHD SitUp. In order to decelerate during the downward motion and return upright, force must be applied in the opposite direction. The GHD, or gluteal hamstring developer, holds the ankle stationary and provides a surface for the legs to press against so the trunk can be leveraged upward. The force applied by the individual to accelerate to the downward middle position must now be reversed by an equal and opposite reaction. The mass of the individual and previous acceleration down is now reversed. More force is generated by the contractions of the hip flexors, abdominals, tibialis anterior, quadriceps, and assisted by the internal rotation and extension of the glenohumeral joint. Newton's second law states that force is equal to mass times acceleration. At the beginning of the GHD SitUp, the downward force is directly proportional to the mass of the trunk and its acceleration. The eccentric contraction of the hip flexors, along with the isometric action in the abdominals, works against this force to control the speed of descent and resist extension in the lumbar spine. During the GHD SitUp, the lumbar spine should remain neutral during the entire motion. A common error that occurs is hyperextension in the lumbar spine, especially during the downward phase of the movement. According to Lawrence, Elser, and Stromberg, 2016, frequent end-range lumbar extension puts athletes at risk for injuries such as lumbar spondylolysis. To avoid the stress on the low back, athletes should practice distinguishing motion at the hips from motion in the lumbar spine. Additionally, one should understand how to engage the lower extremities in order to properly execute the upward motion. To conclude, here is a full range of motion neutral spine GHD sit-up.